on if you walk out to that floor right now and somebody drops an F-bomb, it's because of what they're dealing with, and they're just letting it out so they don't lose their minds on their family later. That's how we
Right.
deal with things in here. And he went into this whole tirade for like 10 minutes. And these
Good for
these
him.
HR people just stood back, went, I think we're gonna have to regroup for the afternoon.
Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of 911 Delta Tethered for Life podcast. As usual, this episode may not be suitable for all listeners due to language and content, so listen with care and stay safe out there.
All right, folks, buckle up because today we've got a guest who's basically done everything in public safety. Jason Klink is here, and he's not just your average firefighter turned dispatcher. Oh no. He's been a fire chief, an emergency manager, and even a public safety dispatch supervisor. Now he's co-founded SmartProtect Public Safety Solutions and works his magic at Safe Cities, all in the name of teching up the world of emergency services. Basically, if it involves public safety, he's done it and then probably made it better. So grab those headsets. Let's go.
Haha, that teching almost got you, didn't it, Casey? I was going to say unkey, but we don't have that option here. Honestly, I'm still in shock that someone with Jason's background would even spend an hour on our little podcast. Guess we're moving up in the world. So keep those likes and shares and ratings going, guys. We love it. Thank you so much. I'm Jason. Today we've got a guest who brings decades of experience and a wealth of knowledge to the table. Jason spent 19 years as a dispatcher and an amazing 30 years as a firefighter. He's seen the job from both sides of the mic, and he's here to share his insights and experiences from the front lines and behind the scenes. Jason, we're thrilled to have you join us. So welcome to 911 Delta, Tethered for Life, and let's hear more about your journey.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Anna. Yeah, it's been a long journey. A matter of fact, I was just talking the other day how I grew up in a volunteer firehouse. My father was a volunteer firefighter for 37 years, went up and down the line, was a chief officer. And out of the three, my two brothers and I was the only one that really jumped into the fire service. I got a brother that's a cop and a brother that's a bar owner. Yeah.
That's a
So
great combination, though, in the
it,
public
it
safety
worked.
world. That's
It
fantastic.
works out well for many public safety people. And matter of fact, my brother that's the bar owner actually owned a bar that was across the street from our firehouse, so it worked out even better.
That's awesome.
Nice, nice.
But yeah, I decided this was the path I was going to take, and at 14 years old, I started out as a junior firefighter and started doing that. Then I started looking, well, maybe I'll go to college and get a degree in fire something. Problem with that is I wasn't a great student. So after that, after a year of college, I kind of jumped into the working world. I was in the volunteer fire service, still kind of participate here and there for the last 30 whatever years. I was a Department of Defense federal firefighter for 5 years when I was a very young man. I worked at a few different military installations. And back then we made $34,000 a year to ride fire truck, and I thought that was great because up to that point I was doing it for free. Um, so that kind of brought me to a couple different states, but ultimately ended up taking the tests, going through the process, and getting hired as a 911 dispatcher here in Syracuse. So that was September 11th of 2000. So my 1 year anniversary on September 11th, 2001 was a little bit of eventful. Yeah, so that 1 year anniversary I'll never forget. So yeah, I was a dispatcher for 19 years. I was trained as a Syracuse City Police dispatcher, cross-trained to fire and EMS. I was promoted to dispatch supervisor in 2012. And between 2008 and 2012, I decided I was going to try college again. I don't know what I was thinking, but I got a nice degree in fire service administration, nice bachelor's degree that hangs on my wall and I can't really do much with. I thought that for me, and realistically for me at that point, that's when the wear of being in the service for so long started to show up. And I thought the degree would open up other doors for me, and it really didn't happen immediately. 2016, had started to had enough, and I went to talk to a retired police officer that I was very good friends with, and became a real estate broker when he retired. And I went and talked to him. I said, "Hey, Rich, I need to learn something other than public safety." And he goes, "Well, go take the real estate course. Come back and talk to me." I went, "Oh, okay." So took the course, got my license, started part-time in real estate in 2017, which really started the ball rolling for me to learn more about business and everything that goes into that, which dove down a deeper hole of like professional personal development. But for the first time in a long time, I was really excited about what I was doing. On the flip side of the coin, every time I went to work at 911 from 2017 to 2019, I could have cared less if I did anything all day long. I could care less if I answered a call. I had younger dispatchers, we'd be working on the overnight. Oh, what are we going to get into tonight? What are we going to burn down if I was in the fire pod? I'm like, shut your mouths. I don't want to work that hard.
Right.
So really, like, my vision, my attitude wasn't the greatest, but at that point, I needed to do something else. And in New York State, to be a dispatcher and retire as a dispatcher, you have to be 55 and have 30 years of service. And nobody should be doing this job that long. No one.
Yeah, I agree.
We all need to move to Texas because so far they're the winner. 20 years regardless of age. It's kind of like the military, right? So, or the federal service, yeah. So,
yeah, or even the police and fire unions that are able to get 20 to 25 years. Doesn't matter how old they are.
right.
My brother just retired from law enforcement after 22 years, and he's 48,
Wow.
48, 49.
Yeah.
So I watched coworkers come in and they wanted to get to that 30 years. They wanted to max out their retirement, but they were like 57, 58 years old, and they just were tired, but they wanted to get to that 30 years. And I would look at them, and they were great, years prior to that doing their job, but it's like you could see the wear and tear really taking hold, and they just wanted to get to that max retirement. And I'm like, to me, that was just very, very empty. The job up to a certain point was very fulfilling, and having that call for service and be of service. But for me, like the different pathways, because not only was in the fire department and working 911, but I rode ambulance part-time. I worked at Syracuse University Carrier Dome part-time doing EMS. So all of these different pathways of just continually doing the job day in and day out, it got to be a bit much. I was afforded in 2019, I was afforded an opportunity to jump to the dark side and start working for technology vendors. I picked up a sales job working for a public safety scheduling solution company. And it kind of bounced around to different companies since then, working sales, business development, customer success, utilizing what I learned over 30-something years in public safety to be able to connect and still be in touch with the service and still try to make a difference. And I feel myself more motivated and passionate now than I was in 2019, 18, 17.
That sounds really familiar with me too. After 16 years of dispatching, I decided to just put in an application at the local fire department for an admin assistant. Didn't really think much about it and went through the process, and here I am, and still kind of in it, but don't have to do as much. And I absolutely love it. Like the folks I work for, it's just amazing, and I feel refreshed and motivated, and like I don't feel like it's a job like I did when I first started dispatching. Now, like you said, the young folks, they're all up in it. They're, pumped up, but after 70 years, all that fizzles out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, the excitement kind of loses. In 911, it's just, I'm sure the mental factor is what you make of it, but to me, it's a mental beating day in and day out, depending on the calls that you answer.
It most certainly is. So I know you kind of touched base on this. So you've served both as firefighter and dispatcher. Could you tell us a little bit more in depth, what inspired you to transition from fighting fires to working in dispatch? Is it because you were just getting kind of not, I don't want to say burnt out in the firefighting part, but
Well, realistically, it's because I couldn't score high enough on a fire test that I scored high enough on the dispatcher test, and it was a logical sidestep. I still was able to participate in firefighting on the volunteer end of things, but um, and it was like me and my buddies went up and down the East Coast when we were 18, 19, 20 years old taking civil service tests. And a majority, actually, all of the guys that I used to travel around with got hired on different fire departments. But for me, I don't know. It just, for whatever reason, the universe took me down the pathway of, hey, go be a dispatcher. And I was like, yeah, cool. Well, and when I came, funny thing is when I guess came into 911, I went through the classroom training, and then at the end of classroom training, they were going to decide what discipline you were going to dispatch. And I was hoping for fire and EMS, and they were like, you're going to be a city police dispatcher. And I went, I know nothing about the city nor the police department. What do you mean? Fast forward to the end of my career, I much rather have dispatched the police cars than the fire trucks.
Oh my gosh. So what would you say has been the biggest challenge in each of the roles? Like, I'm sure it's such a different experience
Yeah.
on both sides of the line. So,
Yeah, you mean the difference between fire and 911?
yeah, let's start with
Yeah.
that, and then we can go on to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so, I worked in the fire end of things. Like when I started, because I grew up in the volunteer firehouse, I thought I knew everything at 19. And then I started working for the Department of Defense at 21 and working at different military installations. I found out how much I didn't know. But then, coming back and, I went up the line through being a line officer, a chief officer, and eventually fire chief, and learning from different people on leadership skills and that thing. Firefighting was just it felt like it was something that was, and it's corny, but it felt like something that was in my DNA, which I guess it was to an extent. Dispatching, though, was just a different outlet to be able to continue to be in that service and to help people. And I used, my first 10, 15 years of my career, I was always excited like the young guys that at the end I wanted to see what they could get into. I was the same way. What can we dispatch? Yeah, how can we make 8 hours or 12 hours go by really fast? So it was the jobs were different and the environments were different. But at the end of the day, the outcomes typically were the same. And I was kind of middle management at 911, where in the firehouse I was, a chief officer and a senior firefighter and so on. So I took that into my role as a supervisor at 911 in hopes of trying to be successful there. So kind of a long-winded point, but that's the way I was looking at it at the time.
So staffing has been such a big topic lately for everyone in the emergency services, it seems. What are some of the impacts you've seen in the dispatch center and, out in the field with staffing levels?
Yeah, staffing, you can call it a staffing crisis, staffing challenges. Either way, I have found over the last 5 years that what was going to happen in 5 years was accelerated to 3 because of the pandemic. Early 2023, I started thinking about how AI, analytics, machine learning could be a benefit to public safety. How can we make this technology work to make the job easier? And, I was looking at, well, could it help with training? Could it help with scheduling, staffing, whatever? Ultimately, kind of saw where it could really be a benefit when it came to staffing. But at the time, I was kind of like, haha, maybe someday. Fast forward to July of last year, and I had a professional disruption, and it was a jumping off point of someday became today. And how can we make this technology work to help staffing? The more I dove into it, the more I learned, the more profound it really became of what the challenges and or crisis was facing not only 911 but public safety. 911 in particular, it wasn't just mass retirements. It wasn't people getting 20, 25, 30 years and leaving. It was people like me that had 10, 15, 20 years that burned out, had enough, didn't want to do it anymore, and left. That's an
Yep.
awful lot of experience walking out the door.
Right.
And in my center alone, I wasn't the only one. There was probably at least 10, 8 to 10 that were as experienced or more experienced than me that left. A good friend of mine that started the year before I did at 911 got so fed up with the job that he thought he was just going to go be a dispatcher at Amazon for their trucks. Found a bid process to bid for their small package shipping because Amazon in our area, their two facilities were relatively new. And he wins the bidding process. Now he runs the small package shipping for Amazon here, and he's never looked back at nine.
That's awesome.
And it's just those things where at some point you got to stop the bleeding, and you can't expect if you're a staff of 100 and you only have 65, how can you expect those folks to continually work 12, 14, 16 hours every single day, taking that mental beating, burning themselves out, just for the promise they can double their salary by getting all the overtime they want, right?
And that's not where we're from. And we also had on-call schedules. We had mandatory 12 hours at some point a
Yeah.
month. So, I mean, and you could bet your ass that somebody was going to call out the day you were on call. It never failed. So that's, another 12-hour shift right there.
And you're expecting folks just to continue to pick up the slack, and it's like, you look at like the generational shift that's gone on. The baby boomers have all but retired. Generation Xers like me are quickly approaching retirement if they haven't retired already. So the predominant workforce is millennials and Gen Zs. And millennials and Gen Zs have a very different outlook when it comes to work, career, work-life balance. That's their big thing. Shifts, shift patterns. They want to work their 8 hours and go home. They want to have a life. They don't want to work 12, 14, 16 hours days. And if they can't just work 8 hours and go home, they're going to take as many days off as they need to. Government loses because you can advertise all you want that you're going to pay somebody $50,000 a year to be a 911 dispatcher and work all those hours, and they look at Amazon and they can go throw packages for $60,000 a year and work 8 hours a day and take less of a mental beating. That's where government loses. And how can we make this better? It's just that we have had this whole dynamic shift in our workforce and in our service-based workforce that government and public safety they're just slow to overcome it. They really are.
Yeah, and I don't know if this affects the dispatch as much as like fire service, law enforcement, but because I hadn't probably been doing it that long, but I did see it in the military because my dad was military. And back even when I met my husband and he was he was still volunteering as well as working as a fireman at the time. Like both of those departments actually were very, very, I don't know if family oriented is the right word, right? But they were very inclusive. It was very much, you know, somebody retires, everybody shows up. If somebody's sick, if somebody has a baby, the chief is calling you, it was very personal, I guess, and they were not huge departments, okay? And I know it's harder when you have huge departments, but also when you have huge departments, you have more chiefs, right? You have more people.
Yep.
And I don't know if, I feel like us Gen Xers, we kind of, and probably the millennials to an extent were like, we can do this on our own. Like, we don't need anybody's shit. We don't need you. We don't we're doing this. Just let us the hell alone and we can do it.
Yep.
And now that's come full circle with, the younger generations. And they're like, but wait.
Yeah.
We don't want to be just work is exclusive and, you work 60 hours a week. I mean, because you think about how, when we were growing up, it was like, people work 60 hours a week and that was like a badge of honor, and you think of all the finance and the business people who, they never had kids and never had families because of that and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like now that has totally shifted. But you're right. I don't think that the government departments have, like, they're still on the other, they haven't come around yet all the way. And it's like, and then how do we come back around without, you can't step on any toes now. You can't hurt anybody's feelings. So then that puts a whole nother, spin on it. Yeah, I just feel like there's such a big disconnect. And I think it happens. I think it's prevalent, in just the public safety world in general, fire, EMS, law enforcement. I think everybody that we've talked to kind of has the same feeling,
For sure.
that there's just a big disconnect from the chiefs to the not I can't say Indians, the lower, just the
The
paid
rank and
employee,
file.
right? Yeah, the
Yeah.
bottom rung employees. And even I think middle management. I think sometimes, from the people where Casey and I worked, there was a kind of a big disconnect there a lot. And sometimes you'd have a good person in the middle, that
Hmm.
operations person who was good and could sort of work both sides, but a lot of times, no, no. And so there's a big disconnect even between the powers that be and then middle management.
Yep.
And then middle management, and then half the time as a dispatcher, you're working the floor. You're not
Yeah.
managing shit. You're working the floor
Yep.
because there's not enough people.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
what do
No,
you
it's
have time for?
100%. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I have also learned in doing and starting my startup was, or co-founding my startup was, technology is not going to fix everything. It can't fix bad leadership. It can't fix dwindling budgets.
Right.
But it can help make the job easier. My first interaction when millennials started coming into the workforce was, they work their 8 hours and they stand up and leave. We'd be in queue. We'd have calls on hold, and they'd get up and leave because it was the end of the shift. Where my generation and the class, the employees that were hired before them were like, it maybe five after, but we have to answer more calls. We're on hold.
Right.
And we thought they were inherently lazy, but what it was it was their 8 hours. They worked their 8 hours. They were done. They were leaving.
Right.
That's where that shift started, and a lot of us didn't recognize it.
Right.
I was at a trade show and I talked to a 911 supervisor in her center, small center. Max staffing was 21. They were operating with 6 personnel.
Wow.
I'm like, how are you functioning? She's like, a lot of overtime. I guess so.
A lot of overtime, a lot of burnout.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
Even my old center, at last I knew, they were down over 40 or 45 people from max staffing. I talked to an M1 supervisor. She goes, "Oh, I'm at full staffing. I'm like, I would love to know how you did that." She goes, "I paid them more money and they all stayed." I said, "Well, that's the beginning and the end of it."
yeah.
Right.
I mean, money's great, but I tell you,
Yeah. And I think there are, I mean, we've talked about it, Casey. There are places out there that are doing it right because we hear about them. We haven't gotten anybody from any of those departments to come on here yet.
no.
Um, so they're not giving away their secrets, but yeah, there's definitely, I think that shift in workforce, definitely we would always be like, oh my God, these kids, like, do the work. Like,
They're right.
and they were actually probably smarter than us. They were like, no, we're not gonna do the work. We're not
Yeah.
crazy people. And yeah. And then so a friend of my husband and I, she's worked, she's not a firefighter, but she's worked for the fire service for years and used to work for a company that did a lot of research and development, like for things like staffing, HR stuff. She was telling me well, it would have been 2 years ago, I guess, that the new like Gen Z is they're very motivated into, community and all of the things that people say were traits of the boomers, right? Like everybody, volunteered and everybody
Yeah.
did all these things. And so it's very interesting because I'm like, okay, but if they are, what are they doing? Because it's not public service. They're doing something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where they are probably doing more more community activism than public
Right.
service.
Right.
And like a lot of what my startup and my company does is, can we take a look at like exit interview information to find out why people are leaving? Why are
Nobody
they
does that.
leaving? Right. Not many agencies do that. Why are they
Right.
leaving? How can you fill in the holes? Um, and then how can you use demographic data to recruit better,
Right.
and make sure you're getting the recruits that you need. All of this is stuff that public safety is notoriously a decade behind in technology. Any
Oh yeah.
pillar of public safety is usually a decade behind in technology. This whole AI craze, we'll call it AI push, you can bet that public safety probably won't really dive in too deep into it until like 2030,
Right.
2032. And it's just they like to wait and see how technology will work itself out. Will it benefit them? I still remember the firehouse when thermal imaging cameras came out, and they were like $10,000 or $20,000. So the department could get a grant by one. Now they're
Right.
$1,000 each, and they're in every seat. So
Right.
it's they get more comfortable with it. The supply and demand evens out, and the prices come down, and so on.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah,
that kind of plays into my next question is how do you feel that the staffing, the not keeping up with the AI, the new technology, how do you feel that that affects the day-to-day operations?
I think public safety 911, where they're failing to recognize is the fact that they're continuously relying on pieces of paper, policies, standards, procedures, SOGs, whatever you want to call them, that may or may not have been updated in the last decade. So if you're relying on that instead of relying on the data you're sitting on, majority of 911 centers have a ton of data. They have huge data sets, no matter the size of the center. Law enforcement, same way. Fire, similarly. EMS, similarly. If you're not relying on what's right in front, because data doesn't lie, you can't bend it, you can't break it, you can't manipulate it. So you have all that information. Instead of saying, hey, like here in the Northeast, we're getting the massive snowstorm. It's going to hit at rush hour because, of course, it will.
Of course.
How are we going to staff up? Well, last time we staffed up by 5, so let's do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Now, there may be storm surge protocols and different things or event surge protocols but where are you getting that information from? Where's that data coming from? So instead of switching from those very subjective, policy-driven decisions, how about taking a look at the data that you have right in front of you? And some agencies are good about the technology that they use. They may be using different types of data dashboards and stuff right now. They may be using some of the call triage technology that's out there and so on. But a lot of agencies, I bet you about 60% of public safety agencies across the U.S. are still using manual processes for a lot of things that they do: staffing, scheduling, record keeping, and so on. And they're just making their jobs so much harder because everything is just moving, and there's just so much more calls for service and different things. It's like the definition of insanity of trying to do the same thing over and over again, trying and expecting a different result. Public
Right.
safety does that a lot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, Jason, this is a popular question that we get, so we're going to shift gears back a little bit. But can you share one of your most memorable calls as a dispatcher or when you're out in the field?
Oh gosh.
I mean, I know
Actually,
without fear, you probably have tons, but just
yeah.
one.
I actually, for ha-has, I wrote a small book just on my calls and my time in the fire service. And it's amazing because I can tell you about calls from 15 years ago, but I can't remember what I had for dinner last night.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of my memory of certain type of events really are triggered by something somebody says or something that I see. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
it kind of jumbles all together. I've seen a lot of bad things. I've seen burnt people, injured people, houses that were on fire from front to back, side to side. My first suicide call at 911, still remember that because I was in training. And this woman called 911, and I'm sitting next to my trainer, and it's early in the morning. It was like 7 or 7:30 in the morning. And this woman calls, and I think my husband killed himself. And I was like, okay, why do you think this? He left me a note and told me not to come in the garage.
Oh,
Oh,
shit.
So I looked at my trainer, and he's like, you got to have her go check the garage.
Yeah.
So I said, all right. So I instruct her, and I muted. I go, she's going to scream, isn't she? He goes, oh, yeah. So sure enough, she looks in the garage window, and he had shot himself, which obviously for good reason. She was very upset and yelling and so on, and trying to calm her down, trying to, do you think he's dead? Do you think he's alive? That kind of stuff. Still remember that to this day.
I bet. I still remember my first suicide call too.
Yeah. Yeah. I've taken a ton of calls. I've taken, if I never took another domestic call ever again, I would have been happy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, I think, Casey, but are they not the worst on the
Awful.
holidays?
Yep.
What?
We used to joke that during the morning you would get all the stove fires.
Right.
Or chimney fires because people were stoking up the fireplace and cooking their food.
Right.
And then by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, you could tell when the family started getting sick of each other or drunk. And that's when the domestic started.
Because, Redskins are kicking the Cowboys' ass.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, it's,
Yep.
and some of the calls you could laugh at, some of them could really bother you. I'm glad to see that like mental health awareness is a little bit bigger deal now than it used to be back then.
Yeah.
You take a bad call and it was, go take a walk or have a good cry and come back to work.
Yep.
Because some calls are just hard. We all know that.
Yes.
It's just, God. And it was funny because when that 911 show was on ABC, it was kind of a real reality show, Alaska and New Orleans and different things. Started watching that with my wife, and my wife has no knowledge of public safety, never been in public safety. She's a school teacher. And we're watching this, and she goes, is that really how those calls go? I go, yeah, pretty much. To this day, I can regurgitate EMD in my head, just because it was so memorized.
Yeah.
But after like 5 or 6 episodes of that show, I'm like, I got to stop watching this. It's just kicking up too much PTSD for me. I don't want to hear this stuff anymore.
Right. You start getting like twitchy, and you're like, oh my God. Yeah. There was that one that was on was it on Oxygen, Casey? And it was a dispatch center that was, I don't know if it was Richland, but I feel like it was one of the law enforcement agencies that was also on
OP Live.
Yeah, before it was OP Live,
Live or whatever it used to be called.
Live on Patrol, or I don't know, whatever it was, before we couldn't call it that anymore. But yeah, and we would laugh because we'd be like, that how much editing they are doing, because there were no F-bombs, there was no it's like,
how many times were you sitting in a center, no matter how big it is, and you'd be sitting there and somebody be dealing with somebody difficult, and you just hear the F-bomb come out of somebody that never swore.
Right.
It's
you knew it wasn't going well when you heard that.
Right. Yep. Or we would one of our friends, notorious for like unkeying on law enforcement radio and unkeying and then just letting it loose, right?
Yep.
And you'd be on the phone, like taking some kind of like serious call or something, trying to give CPR instructions. And you would just hear this in the background and you're like, oh my God, I hope that's not going through my mind.
Yeah, it just, but people like self-regulated and just let it out while they could because, they're dealing with what they were dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise you would get to a point where you would just blow. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't enough, because obviously we've all pushed a lot of shit down through, especially if you've been in it for years.
I mean, I
Yep.
still personally have shit pushed down that I can't or haven't gotten out yet. But I mean, I guess eventually it'll come out. Who knows? But that still bother me. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean you've got to let go what you can when you can, especially if you don't have, like we didn't really get breaks. It was, go pee when you can and eat your food at your desk and
Mhm.
you know, so it was yeah, you got to do what you can to relieve at least the stress in the moment. And then of course now we know from what we've learned, right, is that a lot of times it's just a buildup from crap that you've been dealing
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
And you're just letting it out in little spurts.
Yeah.
But
I remember a time that it was just after I got promoted, and the center felt that we needed sensitivity training as supervisors.
oh
So they
yeah.
bring in county HR to do sensitivity training, and these folks come in
Hmm.
and they wanted to hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
Hmm.
good.
And they were talking about being politically correct and not using swear words and being sensitive and all this stuff. And an hour into this, one of the senior supervisor had finally had enough of hearing this, and he educated this group on if you walk out to that floor right now and somebody drops an F-bomb, it's because of what they're dealing with, and they're just letting it out so they don't lose their minds on their family later. That's how we
Right.
deal with things in here. And he went into this whole tirade for like 10 minutes. And these
Good for
these
him.
HR people just stood back, went, I think we're gonna have to regroup for the afternoon. And they never taught that class at our center ever again.
That's
Good.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh
They
my
just
gosh.
so people have no idea. It's
Yeah.
easy for someone who doesn't do what we've done to do this or that, and it's like, sure, how about you have a seat right here and
Yep.
yeah, well, even
Yeah.
if you don't do any of the work too, you just listen for a minute.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
people have no idea the
They do.
No.
actual degree of stupidity that exists out there. I mean, wow. Okay, so for those who are listening and might be considering this field or new to it, what's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
Yeah, this job, even though it can be very intense and you have kind of the ebbs and flows of activity, right? And 911 is not always, fire is not always that high intensity call. Fire, you're not going out to fight structure fires every hour on the hour. 911, you're not taking a shooting or something in progress or all the time. A lot of it's the domestics, the larceny invests, the burglary alarms and that kind of thing. But it's still a job, it's a career. And I think that the one thing that they don't push a lot of, at least in my area, is developing yourself personally and professionally. And like I said, I came through an era of time where public safety personnel were just expected to be tough and to deal with things. What I think everybody should in this business after a period of time should have regular therapy sessions to work on personal development so you're the best version of you so you can do the best job that you can. I think a lot of that's been missing. And that's what I would encourage anybody going into public service is to make sure you keep growing so you don't get rooted in a seat somewhere, and it could be in a fire truck, patrol car, 911, whatever. Um, because that keeps the motivation alive, that keeps the passion alive. Get involved in different aspects of the agency. You may not want to be a leader. Not everybody's a leader. You may not want to take and move up the next ranks, but you can still participate in maybe some of the technology things, or maybe some of the training aspect of things, or quality assurance, or whatever it might be. I've seen too many of us in this field that you get rooted in your chair, stuck in a rut. You're just doing the same things day in and day out. You're not improving yourself any. And that's where everything else, the negative factors, start building up.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I think even if you don't want to be a leader, you can still do the personal development too. Because I think for me, that was something that was huge. And I think probably really I've always been kind of somebody that was interested in that. Like psychology's always been interesting to me, but
Mhm.
like I think in 2020 when just got really ugly, which I guess you missed that's phase.
I did,
Um,
yeah.
that was when I really was like, oh, like, well, we definitely need to figure out what is causing my stress level to be at a 10 all the time, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's got to come down at some point. So I think that's super important for for people coming in. And, if they did it in the beginning, it would be better. It'd be easier.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. And I barely made it to 2019. If I had to work during the pandemic, I don't know if I would have made it through that. I just think there was too much nonsense going on. I think the job got a lot harder for no good reason. And I look at it now like, I mean, we all judge our lives now between pre and post pandemic, but I think if I was still working at 911, that really would have been the final straw for me, from what I've heard.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think like it gave, for one thing, it gave some of us like a lot didn't change, right? I mean, as far
Right.
as you still went to work and whatever. What But when, the nonsense about law enforcement and the protesting and,
Yeah.
when that, and then it infiltrated everything.
Hmm.
Your officers are miserable.
Yep.
Even my husband, who's always like, nobody hates a fireman. He's like, they don't throw a bottle at us. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's,
And then
it just was a,
at Walmart over, Karen not wearing a fucking mask. Like, get over yourself. Get off my phone. Like, who cares if she's not? That's her problem. That's
it
Karen's
was
Yeah.
like two viruses at once, right?
Come on. So yeah, we did work through that. I left in 22. And I wouldn't say it was horrible, but I mean, it definitely had its moments.
Yeah.
For sure. But our time with you, Jason, is wrapping up. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we head
No,
out? Or
I mean, I appreciate you, allowing me the opportunity to be on your podcast. I love these conversations. As you can see, I have a little bit of word vomit. I could talk about this for 2 hours, but
we
none
get
of it,
you.
none of
Yeah.
us are Joe Rogan, and people would stop listening probably after
Right.
45 or 50 minutes. Yeah, I'm happy to connect and help out anyone in public safety. That's why I built my company or co-founded my company, SmartProtect. And a little bit on that is just that we're providing data and predictive analytics to better align calls for service with staffing levels and using the best of AI and analytics to be able to do that. And I keep having great conversations with great professionals in this field. And, not only seeing where our company can really be a benefit to a lot of public safety agencies, but learning more about how the service is evolving since I left. And I think there's still some great people working in public service and public safety. We just have to find ways not only to make the job easier, but bring more people in and keep them there. So
Yes, totally agreed. Well, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and sharing your insights and experiences with us. Your dual perspective as a firefighter and dispatcher and thereon is invaluable. So we definitely appreciate your time.
thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience. We know our listeners are going to take away a lot from everything you shared, and check out the company SmartProtect. It sounds amazing. I wish our center had used something like that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care.
That's a wrap for today's episode of 911 Delta Tether for Life. We hope you got something valuable from today's chat, and we'd love for you to keep the conversation going. So don't forget to rate the podcast. It helps more listeners find us, and it keeps us doing what we do. And hey, if you enjoyed today's episode, share with your friends, your team, or anyone who could use a little insight on public safety and mental health. You can also stay in the loop by following us on social media. We're always posting updates, extras, and more. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.